They don't shout. They don't rage. They wound you in whispers, and somehow you end up apologizing. You feel guilty without knowing why. You walk away from the conversation confused, replaying every word, wondering what you did wrong, and yet they're the one who always seems hurt. If this resonates with you, stay with me and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything. Covert narcissists are not the loud, obvious manipulators most imagine. They don't demand attention, they earn your sympathy. They hide behind softness, behind phrases like, "I didn't mean to make you feel bad," or "You're too sensitive." They weaponize emotional subtlety, and they do it so quietly that you begin to doubt your own perception. Few people ever recognize this kind of manipulation, because it wears empathy like a mask. You start to believe their sadness is your fault. You start apologizing for their silence. You over-explain your intentions to someone who seems perpetually misunderstood. But what you're really doing, without realizing it, is feeding a wound that never intends to heal. They appear gentle, kind, even humble. You feel bad for them, drawn to protect them. They tell stories about how others mistreated them. You want to be the one who finally understands, and slowly your empathy becomes their supply. You're not crazy for feeling something was off, even when everything looked perfect. You sensed what others couldn't see. You sensed the power imbalance, the way your compassion became a leash. Covert narcissists operate in subtle emotional spaces. They guilt-trip through vulnerability. They manipulate through silence and self-pity. They appear fragile, but control through moral superiority. Their weapon isn't aggression, it's invisibility. It's emotional chess played in slow motion. They don't stab, they bleed on you. You begin to notice the pattern. Every argument ends with you comforting them. Every disagreement turns into their sadness. Every attempt to express your needs becomes an accusation of selfishness. They drain your energy without ever raising their voice. And this is why so many spiritual, sensitive, empathic people fall for them, because you see pain and think it's depth. You confuse emotional fragility with authenticity. You see their wounds and believe you're meant to heal them. But the truth is darker and quieter. These are not broken souls
seeking light. They are mirrors reflecting what you need to fix within yourself. It starts slowly. You overlook the small comments. You forgive the manipulation because they didn't mean it. You take the blame because it feels easier than conflict. But over time, your self-trust erodes. You begin to question your memory. You stop standing your ground. And eventually you start disappearing in the name of love. You find yourself drained, guilty, and uncertain, trapped in a bond that feels
both spiritual and suffocating. They convince you that walking away would be cruel. They convince you that love means endurance. They convince you that silence equals peace. But the silence is not peace, it's punishment. It's control disguised as kindness. This is the dangerous paradox of covert narcissism. They manipulate through moral high ground. You'll rarely hear anger in their tone, but you'll feel it in your body. You'll sense the unspoken accusation behind every sigh, every pause, and every disappointed glance. You start to perform goodness just to avoid their withdrawal. You start to parent their emotions. You start to lose yourself trying to protect someone who feeds on your care. You give, you care, you heal, and still you ache. And here's the cruelest part. The more love you give, the emptier you feel, because your love isn't being received, it's being consumed. But what if their gentleness was never real, only a mirror reflecting what you needed to see? But what if the kindness you were drawn to was the very illusion that kept you asleep? They never shout, they never demand, they simply withdraw, and that withdrawal becomes a leash. You feel it in your body before you can name it. A subtle contraction, a quiet panic that says, "I've done something wrong." Covert narcissists are not powered by arrogance. They're powered by emptiness. An insecurity so deep it disguises itself as humility. Their greatest fear is insignificance, to be unseen, unimportant, forgettable. And so they craft an image of gentleness that makes you want to protect them. They don't dominate your will, they erode your clarity. You start to shapeshift around their moods. You measure every word, every pause, every sigh. Their sadness becomes a storm you're always trying to calm. Society taught you to admire this quiet suffering. Be kind, be forgiving, be the bigger person. But these phrases, when twisted, become tools of control. They glorify the martyr and silence the one who feels. They make guilt a virtue, and guilt is the covert narcissist's currency. You were taught to be the healer, not the human. To absorb pain instead of question it. To take pride in endurance. And that's why you never noticed what was happening, because their cruelty didn't look like cruelty. It looked like care with a hook. Perhaps you found yourself comforting them after they hurt you. Perhaps you've apologized just to restore peace. Perhaps you've explained your intentions again and again, and still they sit there quietly disappointed. Perhaps you've walked on eggshells, not out of fear, but out of guilt. This is how the covert narcissist thrives, by making you responsible for their emotions. Most narcissists demand attention. These ones demand pity. Most control through power. These control through pain. Their power is in absence, in what they withhold. The approval they dangle, the affection they ration, the warmth that flickers just enough to keep you chasing. They are emotional black holes absorbing light without reflection. They build prisons from apologies. They plant seeds of self-doubt and water them with silence. You tell yourself they're fragile. You tell yourself they just need love. But one day you realize they were never fragile. They were feeding on your empathy. That's the awakening. The moment you see that every guilt-soaked apology, every night you stayed up explaining, every time you tried to make things right wasn't healing. It was feeding. You cannot fix them. You cannot fill them. You cannot free them. Say it again, slowly. You cannot fix them. You cannot fill them. You cannot free them. Because every act of fixing keeps you bound to their emptiness. Every time you pour light into their void, it disappears not because they reject it, but because they need the darkness to exist. Let me explain what I mean. The covert narcissist's identity depends on contrast. They are the victim, and you are the savior. The moment you stop saving, the story collapses. That's why they punish peace. That's why every attempt to detach is labeled cold or cruel. They need your empathy the way fire needs oxygen. Once you see their patterns, you start noticing the same energy everywhere in workplaces, friendships, even family. The quiet manipulator. The invisible victim who makes you feel guilty for breathing freely. The person who never apologizes but always hurts accidentally. And here's the unsettling truth: most people will defend them. Because society admires politeness more than truth. We'd rather keep peace on the surface than face emotional dishonesty underneath. But when you wake up to this dynamic, something irreversible happens. You stop reacting to tone and start reading energy. You start recognizing that kindness without accountability is not kindness at all. It's strategy. You realize the covert narcissist doesn't just fear abandonment, they fear accountability. Because accountability requires honesty, and honesty would unravel their mask. They spend their lives creating emotional fog because clarity would expose them. And yet, ironically, it's clarity that frees you. You start noticing small details, how their compliments always have conditions, how their concern always comes with control, how their apologies always begin with, "I'm sorry you feel that way." You begin to breathe again, slowly, cautiously, as if learning air for the first time. And then there's silence, but this time it's yours, the kind that doesn't punish, the kind that restores. That's when you understand the real power of awareness, because awareness is the one thing they cannot manipulate. You cannot fix them, you cannot fill them, you cannot free them, and the moment you stop trying, they lose control. But what happens when you finally stop feeding their silence with your empathy? At first, the silence feels unbearable. You reach for your phone, half expecting their name to appear. It doesn't. The mind begins its ritual of self-blame. Maybe I overreacted, maybe I misunderstood, maybe I should have stayed. But this time something deeper interrupts. A small voice that whispers, "No, you're not abandoning them. You're returning to yourself." That's how transformation begins, not with grand awakenings, but with quiet refusals. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop fixing. And in that stillness, a strange thing happens. Their confusion becomes their teacher. The manipulator meets their own silence. The one who fed on your empathy must now face their emptiness. You realize that your peace threatens those who relied on your chaos. This is the beginning of detachment. Not cold, not cruel, but sacred. Because detachment is not the Pottercub, Torah's absence of care. It's the presence of clarity. You sit with your silence until it speaks back. You realize you were never supposed to fix others, only to understand yourself. The guilt will come like waves. You're being heartless. They need you. What if they never recover? But you breathe through it. Because now you understand, guilt is not compassion. It's conditioning. Isn't walking away cruel, they ask? No, it's clarity. You cannot heal through self-erasure. Won't they hate me? Yes, because your absence removes their reflection. And without that reflection, they are forced to see what's really there. You begin to see the difference between love and attachment. Love says, "I wish you peace." Attachment says, "I'll lose myself to keep you close." You've lived in attachment long enough to know it always ends the same way, with you empty and them full. Now you're learning a new language: boundaries. This is not selfishness. You tell yourself. This is sovereignty. Because every time you say no, you're saying yes to your soul. Every time you choose silence over explanation, you're teaching your nervous system what safety actually feels like. You start to merge empathy with boundaries. You no longer rescue pain. You witness it. You see suffering without dissolving into it. You love without losing yourself inside someone else's story. You become both open-hearted and untouchable. And this changes everything. Because when you stop chasing people into their darkness, you start walking toward your own light. When you stop managing their moods, you start mastering your peace. When you stop rescuing pain, you begin respecting truth. A tree doesn't chase the sun, it grows toward it. A candle cannot stay lit in someone else's storm. You are the mirror shattering, reflecting only truth. At first, the solitude feels sharp, like stepping into cold water, but soon it becomes warm. You start noticing how silence holds you, how peace hums beneath every breath, how presence feels like home. Fear will whisper again, what if no one understands me? What if they think I'm cold? What if I end up alone? But solitude teaches you the difference between peace and absence. Only those still trapped will call you cold. And true connection doesn't depend on control. It flows where freedom exists. This is shadow work in its purest form, the integration of opposites. You begin to hold both light and darkness without judgment. You understand that compassion without boundary becomes bondage. And now your empathy has matured into wisdom. You begin to forgive, not to reconnect, but to release. You forgive yourself for staying too long, for explaining too much, for mistaking pity for love. And in that forgiveness, the self you buried under guilt begins to breathe again. Your energy shifts. People sense it. Those who once drained you grow uncomfortable. Those who are ready to meet you rise to your level. You no longer resonate with chaos. You vibrate with calm. And that calm, that stillness becomes your power. Let me explain what's really happening here. The covert narcissist spell only works when you need their approval. The moment you stop seeking it, their control evaporates. You were never trapped by their manipulation, only by your desire to be understood by them. But now understanding isn't your goal. Peace is. You've stopped trying to prove your goodness to those committed to misunderstanding it. You've stopped trading self-respect for connection. You've stopped explaining your boundaries to those who benefit from your lack of them. And in doing so, you've done something extraordinary. You've rewritten the pattern. This is the rebirth, the quiet revolution that happens inside your own nervous system. The moment you realize you don't need to be needed to be worthy, you walk differently now. Not with bitterness, but with awareness. Not with walls, but with wisdom. Because what happens next is the beginning of power, the kind that no manipulator can touch. Give yourself permission to stop explaining your heart to people committed to misunderstanding it. Give yourself permission to walk away without closure. Give yourself permission to be seen only by those who truly see. This is not abandonment. This is alignment. You are no longer living to be understood, you are living to be at peace. Because once you see clearly, you no longer need to prove anything. Your truth stops begging for validation. Your presence becomes its own explanation. You begin attracting people who match your energy, not your empathy. Peace replaces confusion. Stillness replaces chaos. The storm no longer feels like home. You start to understand that peace isn't boring, it's sacred. That stillness isn't emptiness, it's the sound of your spirit remembering itself. You no longer seek intensity disguised as love. You seek resonance, calm eyes, grounded voices, gentle energy that doesn't demand you shrink to fit inside it. This is what happens when an empath heals their light, no longer flickers for others to find. It burns steady for themselves. You become the bridge between awareness and compassion, not trapped in either. You carry understanding without attachment. You can see people's pain without stepping into their fire. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer absorb, you observe. You learn that wisdom doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits. It knows its own timing. When healed, empaths become the true mirrors of awakening. They teach through calm, not correction. Through presence, not persuasion. You've stopped trying to convince the asleep to awaken. You've stopped offering your light to those who prefer the dark. You simply walk softly, clearly, freely. And the world begins to respond to you differently. You draw in those who speak the same frequency. Those who value honesty over performance. Those who can meet you at the level of truth instead of need. You were never naive for believing in love. You were simply seeing potential where others hid emptiness. You were not weak for caring. You were strong for feeling deeply in a world that numbs itself to survive. But now you've learned discernment, the rarest form of empathy. You've learned that not every cry for help deserves your response. That not every wounded soul wants to heal. That sometimes silence is the loudest form of self-respect. You've stepped out of the game. You no longer need to win. You no longer need to explain. Let them play their quiet games. You are no longer a piece on their board. The healer has become the light itself. The moon does not chase the tide. It simply moves it. You cannot explain truth to denial. You cannot love honesty into manipulation. You cannot lose yourself again, not after seeing this clearly. This is your quiet victory. No fireworks, no revenge, no proof. Just peace radiant, effortless, earned. Because the true ending of this story isn't escape, it's evolution. And evolution never begs. You have not lost them. You have found yourself. And that was the point all along.